Sounds like a classic hacking soundtrack.
Hello, how are you? Today is the first time that we have an international webinar. So I'm Oscar Arellana, and I will be your introducer guy with Natalia. Natalia was my companion today, and she will speak about the something. Who is with us, Natalia? Do you remember anything? Nati, you are mute.
Sorry, I talk a lot. Well, hello, Oscar. Yes, we have with you John DeLeo of New Zealand with the webinar of Samm. Hello, John.
Hello. I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to speak with you today. And the organizers of today's session have asked me to give a presentation about the Owasp Software Assurance Maturity Model, or Samm project. So I'll be going over a set of slides that we use to help folks understand what Samm is and how it can be a benefit to them. And throughout the presentation, if you have a question and you enter it in the private chat, then one of the panelists can interrupt me to ask the question, or we can wait until the end. Just because of my laptop configuration, I can't actually see the live chat while presenting.
Yeah. How are you today, John? It's our first time that we made an international webinar, especially completely in English. So we're really excited what you presented to us. I think that Samm as a maturity model, it's really nice and it's a really good project. So we enjoyed about it. But what do you think about the first time that you speak in here in Chile?
I think it's very interesting. I'm very glad that you said it was okay to present in English, since my Spanish is very poor.
Okay.
All right, are we ready to get started?
Everyone is yours. We
Excellent.
will interrupt you if have any question.
All right. So before I get started with the content, a little bit about myself. I'm originally from the United States, and I've been in New Zealand almost 3 years now. I do hold a doctoral degree. It's actually in operations research, where my specialization was in simulation programming. And since I first graduated from university, my career has really been in 3 lanes. Initially, for the first several years, I was doing systems analysis work and simulation. I quit that job to go to graduate school and earn my doctorate. And while I was in graduate school, I ended up starting to do web application development, which I then did for about 12 years. And in 2014, I got the opportunity to switch from focusing on web application implementation to web application security. And that's what I've been doing ever since. As part of that, I got involved in the local Owasp chapter. At the time, I was in Kansas City, Missouri. And then when I moved to New Zealand, I volunteered to help here and very quickly found myself as one of the chapter co-leaders here in New Zealand. I got involved in the Samm project about 2 years ago and am one of the authors of the most recent model version. About a year and a half ago, I co-founded the Owasp AppSec curriculum project, and I'm also a member of the chapters committee, which was recently reformed. So I do a little bit of Owasp work, and with the time zone difference, it often means some very late nights and very early mornings. But it's definitely rewarding, and I would encourage anyone who is interested to go ahead and get involved with Owasp and the projects that we offer. So to the subject matter of the day, what is Samm? As I mentioned before, Samm stands for the Software Assurance Maturity Model. The intention of the model is to provide an open framework that lets you assess where your software security posture currently is, and then to identify ways that you can work to improve it and make progress toward a more mature posture. One of the things that I like to mention is when we say software assurance, well, what do we really mean? And the definition that I usually work with is that software assurance is all of the things we do to provide our stakeholders with confidence that we are producing software which is free of security defects, that functions reliably as we intend it to, and does not have any unintended functionality that would present a security risk. So assurance is not an absolute. It is as we do better, as our processes become more mature, as we're able to provide more evidence of the breadth and coverage of our testing, as we're able to show maturity in our architectures, we improve everyone's confidence that we have done things correctly and that we have produced defect-free software. We know that it's impossible to remove the last bug. So this is a continual process of getting better and helping everyone to be more confident, have more assurance in the security of our applications. The little inset here talks about some things that are important, that as we're looking at a maturity model, we want to make sure that it is measurable so that we can identify how we're doing against some scale. We want it to be actionable so that once we understand what our maturity is, we have a clear understanding of the path to being more mature. And we would like for it to be versatile. So we don't want it to be focused on any one technology or any one process, such as waterfall versus agile. And we don't want it to be tied to the organization that originates it. A very common framework that many folks know about is the Microsoft Security Development Lifecycle, the SDL. And while it offers a lot of useful insights for development organizations, it was written for Microsoft by Microsoft. So when you look at the SDL, while it is possible to adapt it to your organization, it's not really organization agnostic. In the case of Samm, we're trying to make sure that it is that way from the beginning. So what is Samm? Basically, it's a collection of resources And the purpose of these resources is to help you do a few things. First, to understand where your security practices stand now and how mature they are and how much assurance they provide that you are doing things in a secure manner. And then to aid you in building your program, to identify the things you should work on next, the new practices that would be the most benefit to introduce. They allow you to demonstrate through reassessments that the actions you're taking are improving your maturity and your overall posture. And it allows you to define activities that can be used throughout your organization. Or if you prefer, you can focus the SAM scope just within one development group. So while many of the things you'll see in the model talk about the organization, that does not mean it has to be the entire enterprise. It is possible for one business unit or the owner of one product portfolio to decide that they would like to use SAM. You don't have to encompass the entire enterprise in introducing SAM. A little bit about the history of the project. OpenSAM was developed by an independent security researcher and was published under an open source license in March of 2009. At that time, some funding had been received from Fortify, which is now part of HP, and the OpenSAM 1.0 model was made publicly available. It really sat unchanged until version 1.1 was released in March of 2016. So this was one person's labor of love. He produced the model and really didn't have time to maintain it or promote it. And after making some minor modifications in March of 2016, he approached Owasp, offering to allow Owasp to create a project to take over and bring SAM forward. So that happened in March of 2016, and Owasp SAM version 1.1 was published. Now this was identical to OpenSAM 1.1, except in the naming and the copyright ownership. Since then, about a year later, Owasp SAM version 1.5 was released, which included a few improvements that the project team identified could be accomplished fairly quickly. So that model version was published. Brian Glass in the US was one of the key players in that effort. And I'll actually talk about some of the improvements that came in there in a future slide. And that's where we stood for a while. Coming out of that 1.5 effort, a broader project team was created, and Bart and Seba, who are now the project co-leads, got involved. And at that point, the target was to produce a SAM version 2.0, which was meant to be a significant improvement over the 1.1, 1.5 models. And the team of which I've been a part since 2018, we were able to complete that and publish version 2.0 this past January. So why? Well, you need a model. Something like the entire software assurance program of an organization, what it can be, what it should be, and how things are going overall, is something that is too broad and really too large to encompass without representing it in some kind of a model. Well, of course, whenever you introduce a model, you are simplifying things. So every model is a useful approximation to reality. I guess what I should say is every model is an approximation to reality. If it's useful, then it's a good model. So in this case, As with the famous quote from George Box, the famous statistician, some models are useful, and when they're useful, they provide value and can be used both to describe where you are and to prescribe where you're going. Some of the principles on which the Samm model is based are encapsulated in these 4 concepts. We recognize that for most organizations, changes in behavior are going to happen slowly. This is not something where you can simply say, starting on Monday, we're going to do everything differently, and then expect that to work. Instead, you need to understand that the organization as a whole is going to only accept change that is done slowly. So your approach to improving software maturity, assurance maturity, needs to be iterative. You keep an eye on what your long-term goals are, but you define the small steps you're going to take to get there and give yourself a number of milestone definitions of done. Another point is that there is no one approach that's going to work for everybody. So you want to make choices that are best appropriate for your organization, and the best way to do that is based on risk. By understanding where your risks are greatest and where you are best able to reduce your risks, that will help you to know what you should work on next. A way that Samm is different from some other maturity models, such as BSIM, is that it is prescriptive rather than descriptive. So in BSIM, for example, the model really says, we've identified these companies which we believe are mature. So we went to them and asked them what they do. These are the things they told us they do. Therefore, mature organizations do these things. It's not really telling you what the benefit is from doing any of them. It's simply relating the fact that organizations we thought were mature do them, so why don't you try that? Samm took the approach of saying, in order to become mature, here are the things you need to do. That is a slightly different perspective, and it means that our model differs in how, in particular, maturity levels are related to one another. And overall, we need something that is simple, that can be understood, that can be worked on in smaller pieces, that is very well defined, and most importantly, is measurable. And we believe that the Owasp Samm model does that for maturity in software assurance. The structure of the model is that we have business functions defined. Under each of the business functions, we have a set of 3 practices defined. Under each of the security practices, there are 2 streams defined. And then within each stream, we describe activities that your organization should be performing at the different levels of maturity. So as you progress from level 1 to level 2 in a given security practice stream, these are the new activities that you should now be able to say you do. Obviously, we talk about this needs to be measurable. So how do we measure this? And this was actually the key change that was introduced between version 1.1 and 1.5. So in the first 2 versions of the model, OpenSAM 1.0, as well as OpenSAM and Owasp SAM 1.1, scoring was binary. You would be presented with an assessment question. do you do this activity? And the available answers were yes and no. If you answered yes, you would get 1 point to count toward your maturity score. If you answered no, you would get 0. So a great deal of time and energy got invested in deciding when it was okay to say yes. How close to done do we need to be? In version 1.5, this scoring scale was introduced. So if you were to say, no, we really don't do that, then you would score yourself a 0. If you can honestly say, well, we do that practice, but only in a few of our projects, then you would answer some and give yourself a 0.2 score out of 1. If you could say, yes, we do that for about half of our projects, then you'd give yourself the 0.5 score. You wouldn't go to a full score of 1 until you could honestly say about 80% of our projects are doing that, and we're already working on the rest. So this way, instead of just trying to understand how much is enough to give ourselves full credit, you can start to gain that partial credit as a specific practice moves out into your organization. Now, some changes between versions 1.5 and 2.0. The first change is that we went from 4 business functions in the earlier versions to 5 in Samm 2.0. And the main reason for that was in the earlier version, which is on the next slide, there was a construction business function. The truth was that that was not fine-grained enough and didn't give us enough detail about the kinds of practices involved. So we now have a design business function and an implementation business function. We still have 3 security practices in each function. And across those practices, it covers areas that are relevant to software assurance. Now, not all of those are directly development practices. Some of them have to do with how you're managing defects and what your data protection policies are and how you're managing your operational environments. So they're not directly coding, committing, and testing software. They help to encompass that whole environment that you need to be operating in order to deliver a secure solution in production. Now, the bullets here list a few of the changes that have been made. Most of the practices that were in the former construction business function are now part of design. Implementation is where we introduced some new practices. The verification business function was changed quite a bit. And then a former practice called operational enablement now has individual elements spread out through several different practices, and the operational management practice was introduced. So now let's look at some diagrams of what that looks like. This was the Samm 1.5 structure. And you can see we had governance, construction, verification, operations. In Samm 2.0, we now have governance, design, implementation, verification, and operations. And the operational enablement practice is gone, but pieces of that come across in secure deployment, they come across in architecture, they show up in environment management. So the intention of that practice has not been eliminated from the model. It's been pulled into the different new practices where elements of it are most appropriate. So this slide just highlights the places where the most changes occurred. So as far as the core of the model, the 7 practice areas that are not highlighted have not changed significantly. Only the core ones that you see highlighted are where the largest changes have taken place. So here is the structure showing in the Samm 2.0 model the streams. So you can see under, for example, strategy and metrics, there are 2 streams: create and promote, and measure and improve. So in the create and promote stream, this is where we're talking about creating our overall security strategy, making sure that everyone in the organization knows what that strategy is, and seeing to it that the strategy becomes embodied in our policies and our practices and our day-to-day operations. On the measure and improve stream, that is where we would bring in things like key performance indicators, metric dashboards, and feedback loops to be able to take the values and the results from our key performance assessments in order to identify our candidates for the next round of improvements. And the same is true through all of these, that you'll have the 2 different streams which are focusing on different things but are closely related. So here's an example of what an assessment looks like. One of the elements that was recognized as a pain point in both version 1.1 and 1.5 was, how do I know when we're doing a good enough job to give ourselves credit? So we had long conversations that lasted over more than a year around how might we create a measurement tool that would let us capture both that breadth of coverage, how much of our organization is this practice present in, as well as the quality of the implementation. We looked at a number of ways of doing it with different scores on different questions. How do we weight those together to come up with a single number? And ultimately, I have to admit, the team sort of threw up their hands and said, we don't have a good way to combine these. And what we arrived at is a compromise. You answer the question. So in this case, it's, has the organization defined a set of risks by which to prioritize applications? And you're going to answer that in terms of for how much of your assessment scope. So if it is the entire organization and your organization has 10 business units, you might assess your coverage by how many of the 10 business units are doing this. If it's around 5 or 6, then you would say, well, at least half. If you're at, say, 8 or 9, then you would say most of the organization. If you can only identify 1 or 2 business units that are now doing this, then you would say some. In deciding for which parts of the organization you can say yes, that's where you look at these bullets. So these bullets become the minimum criteria that need to be true in order to say, yes, this team does that, or this application has that. So in this case, before you can talk about whether or not your organization is defining risks for prioritizing applications, there needs to have been an exercise to understand the organization's risk appetite. We need to have had the conversation with the organization's leadership around what the risks are and how, whether or not they're willing to accept different risks and understand the risk definitions that we've laid out. We've gone through and we've identified threats. And of course, we have a useful risk register. All of those things have to be true before you can say, yes, that business unit is doing that. So our score becomes, it has transformed from how many people do it, no matter how poorly they do, to how many of these, in this case, say projects or business units, how many do it at least this level of quality. So you have to get above that quality bar before you can be counted. And that was the assessment compromise that we came up with. It was actually, we finalized this at a session we had in Ireland in November. And then that was incorporated into the final model. Now, if you want to use Samm and you want to perform an assessment, there are some things that you need. If you want this to succeed, you need to have buy-in from the stakeholders. One of the things that I've encountered many times is that if one senior leader thinks it's a great idea and imposes it on everyone else, you're really not going to get very far, because all of those other stakeholders are resistant to being involved in the first place. They're reluctant to participate. They don't want to invest energy in it. And they really don't feel like they have any requirement to act on recommendations. So it's important to get that buy-in from the beginning so that stakeholders, there's some weird noise in the next room, so that stakeholders understand what they're taking part in and how it can benefit them. And they will go into the effort from the beginning, supporting it and ready to invest the effort required. You want to be taking a risk-based approach. One of the things that kills security efforts all the time is saying, we have to fix everything, we have to do it all right now. Instead, we need to be looking at the risks that are posed by the fact we're not doing a practice, and identify how we can reduce our risk, improve our overall posture by bringing in that practice. Third bullet points out, awareness and education are the foundation here. Everyone who's involved needs to understand what the process is, why we're doing it, and how it can help them. And of course, what we're after, we're trying to get this so that security becomes just part of what we do. It needs to be in the organization's DNA. And a way to make that happen is to have automated tools, dashboards, reports, do some friendly competition among business units for improving their practices, making sure that your senior leadership are aware of where everyone stands, and most importantly, that they are made aware of and reward any successes and improvements that the organization's project teams and business units make. So of course, that leads to the measurement of having that higher visibility. I mentioned BSIM before, and on the right side of the chart is a spider graph for a number of business verticals against the BSIM practice areas. On the left side of the chart is a similar chart that can be done for a Samm assessment. Now, what you might not be able to see very clearly is the legend is talking about start, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. So this is the idea of being able to show across all 15 practice areas how we want to grow our maturity through the phases of our roadmap. The central red area is where we've assessed ourselves to be at the start of our effort. And after we've gone through 4 phases of improvement, we expect to be of the increased maturity. Actually, I think the blue one is the 3rd phase of improvement. So by the end of phase 3, we expect to have improved along all of these dimensions. So spider graphs can be useful when you're trying to look at several metrics at once. And you can see that here. So then there's the question, okay, so I've assessed myself. We have an idea of where we stand, where we are right now. But how do I compare to other organizations? And that leads us to the benchmarking effort. Now, as I mentioned Dr. Glass before, Brian Glass is a professor at a university in North Carolina. And he's been leading up the benchmarking effort for a while now. The goal here is to collect data from organizations that have done assessments, and along with some metadata about their organization or the organization size, the industry vertical that they're in, the kind of software that they work with, in order to allow us to come up with some average maturity assessments across these different groups, which we can then provide in the form of a report, so that if you are, say, a vendor of desktop productivity software, you can then see how your Samm assessment stacks up against other vendors of productivity software. So this goal, as I said, is to collect a comprehensive data set across all sorts of organizations related to their organizational maturity for their programs. And so we're looking for that data to come, whether it's from an organization doing a self-assessment, or in those cases where there are consultants who do this, if you've hired a consultant to come in and do an assessment of you, then we would like for those data sets to be contributed as well. So the plan is basically to set something up in the Owasp cloud. At the time we had only Azure, we now have some AWS resources as well, to get all of the data somewhere where they can be accessed, and to publish from that dashboards to let you look at different comparative data, so that you can look at, so show me the average for all productivity software vendors, show me the average for all South American vendors, so that you can do your own analysis across the data that we've collected. Now, the key thing is that what will be presented will not be able to identify an individual organization. So it's either we'll show you some information that, well, there was one software organization who provided these answers, or across the 55 organizations in this particular industry, here's their average. At no time would we ever tell you, well, these are the numbers that IBM submitted. In order to make this good, we would prefer to have verified data contributions. So although we would not disclose the identity of the organization contributing to the data, we would like to know the identity so that we can verify the data submission and put trust in the data. Now, in that first bullet, it talks about the submitter is known and has agreed to be identified. That's still separately from their data. So if, for example, Microsoft submits an assessment and says, yes, we're happy to be identified, then on our front page, we would say, Microsoft has contributed assessments. But when you're looking at the actual data, you won't know which ones came from Microsoft. And then, of course, we would still accept unverified data, but we would take those as less reliable and possibly weight them lower. So the way that you can go about contributing is you can basically send Brian an email with your assessment results. What we're working toward in the future is to have a place where you can upload results. We also have a separate effort underway to create a web-based assessment tool so that you could go into a public website and enter your answers, which would then become part of the data set. Or you could take that same application, install it locally in order to do your assessments, and then you could take an extract from each assessment and upload that. This, of course, is still, at this point, future work. So talking about the kinds of the data that we would be asking, this is the metadata around the assessments. Want to know who you are, your contact email, when did you do the assessment, what type was it, what industry are you in, how many developers are involved, and we would capture that as dimensions across which we can aggregate the data and provide reporting. So you can check out owaspsamm.org to see information about the benchmarking effort, review the model itself. We have a wonderful getting started guide. We have some concurrent efforts going on now to translate the model itself into a number of languages. There are efforts underway now, at least for Spanish, French, German, and I believe Russian was mentioned in the latest team meeting last week. And this is all, we're using Crowd-in as our mechanism for doing translations. So if you're interested in taking part just in translating the model content, you could contact the project leaders and be made part of that Crowd-in effort for translating the text of the model. Some ways that you can get involved and provide direct feedback. If you join the Owasp Slack workspace, owasp.slack.com, one of the channels is the Project-Samm channel, where the project leaders and a lot of the other members of the project team are watching and looking for questions that come up or comments on the model and taking that information in, responding to questions, and so on. And of course, this is an open project, so there is a GitHub repo. It's under the OWASP master repo, and it's github.com/owasp/Samm. So there you can clone the existing repo, you can submit issues, you could submit pull requests if you are proposing a change to the model, and the team will look at any of those submissions and incorporate them as appropriate. You can stay informed by subscribing to the Samm newsletter. And I have been assured that the QR code on the right side of the slide will take you to the URL listed on the left side, which is a MailChimp EAP URL. We want to take a moment to recognize our sponsors because that's always important. We've had a number of corporate sponsors that have provided funding directly to support development of the model for us to conduct our user conferences, to get together face-to-face in previous years. This year it's virtually, to collaborate on model updates. Torion happens to be where the two project leaders work. And in fact, Seba, kind of the CEO, so it's nice that he got the company to support it. Fortify is still involved. And then Concord is actually where one of our members works. And Concord has produced an online Samm assessment tool, which basically asks you the questions and allows you to enter your responses. But it's not affiliated with the Samm project, and it's not available to be reproduced for local use. However, you could visit that site if you want to play with their tool, and they will let you download your results. So who's involved? As I mentioned Bart and Seba a couple of times. They're both at Torion in Belgium. Dr. Glass is in the US. I'm currently in New Zealand. John Ellingsworth, Hardik, and Jan are all currently in the United States, although Hardik and Jan are neither of them are from the US. And we have Sebastian, who's gotten involved recently, and Patricia is our editorial manager. She's in Uruguay. So we're a very global organization, and we do have lots of challenges with coordinating time zones. At this time, I would be happy to entertain questions.
Yeah, it was a really, really nice presentation. Know a little bit more about the maturance model. And really thank you about it. What do you think about it, Natalie?
I think the same. The presentation was amazing, and I think it was so interesting to determine how to prioritize what is really important or the maturity in the application or software. So I really think that was amazing. So thanks you, John, for that amazing presentation. Do you want to say anything more? I don't know.
I think that I'm waiting for a little bit for any question about the audience, but I think that this one of the how big can be the enterprise to use these maturity models? Does need to be big one or just a little bit enterprise? Which kind of enterprise can use this kind of security model?
Honestly, any size organization can use it. And another key factor is if you're at a very large enterprise, you don't have to start with the whole enterprise. In fact, I'm currently working for an airline here where we have a portfolio of about 500 applications of varying sizes and complexity. And those are spread across a collection of about 20 application owners. So my approach here is to work with the application owners one at a time and do an assessment for their portfolio. So if they're managing, say, 6 project teams, and those project teams are responsible for 15 applications, then we would do an assessment just for that scope. Then I would go to the next project, the next product owner, and do the same thing for what they are responsible for. And then that allows us to put all of that onto a dashboard and start to compare the maturity among the different application groups to see who's making progress and where the different groups stack up against each other. Not to make it a punitive thing, like, why aren't you doing better, but to allow them to have that friendly competition by seeing, oh, well, Tim's group just implemented this new practice and they've popped their score up a little bit. We really should do something too. And by looking across it that way, it lets us focus on a smaller scope when we're trying to answer the question. One of the things that I mentioned, of course, is your answer is based on how many of something you can honestly say yes for. So if the question is about your applications, if you're doing the whole enterprise and the enterprise has 600 applications, then you need to know yes or no for all 600 of them before you give yourself a score. If instead you work at a business unit or an application portfolio at a time, you really need to get that information only for the application you're focusing on right now. It makes the data collection easier. It can help to keep the amount of time required to get an answer down. And then, all I can think of are metaphors, about boiling the ocean, eating an elephant. That you don't want to jump in and try and tackle the whole problem at once. It's better to look at it a bit at a time. Now, if you have just one product team that's interested in doing this, they can just do it themselves. The only time they would look outside their own unit is when the question involves something that's provided by others. So say if security training is managed by the company's HR team, when time comes to say, does your organization train your developers? Well, they don't have to say no because they don't manage training. They would look at what the company provides.
So good. We have one question of the audience. Natalie, please.
Yes, Alberto Villegas says, Can we implement a portion of this framework without going with a full vanilla implementation of it?
I would suppose you could, that you could say, you could look at this and decide that you want to focus without doing a full assessment. I just want to focus on improving governance and look only at those practices. The model is a useful guide for knowing how to get better in that area. So the short answer is yes, you could do that. I think the longer answer is it's probably more useful in the context of a full assessment.
And I think that we have other question, Oscar. Yeah. How to handle if a different business unit are at different level of maturity? And the other question for Mr. Boma, it's how can you try to level up the level of the BUS?
So that's where you're able to look at this on a unit by unit level as far as the roadmap. So for example, if you happen to have one business unit that is very mature, then with that business unit, your team's focus would be on helping them to keep their practices vibrant. You don't want them to go stale. You don't want them to lose any of the ground they've gotten. So the nice thing is that, well, if they're already pretty mature, say if they have a 2.4 score out of 3, then you might not be investing effort in improving them right now. Then you would have another business unit that has shown they have a lot of gaps and a lot of challenges in their maturity. So that would be where you'd focus your effort in helping them improve. Now, each business unit is going to have some room for improvement. So even that one that's relatively mature, you might be able to identify 1 or 2 things they can go ahead and work on to improve further. But in each case, you would have that separate assessment for each business unit, and each of those assessments would identify the next best thing for them to work on. So you don't really need to worry about trying to get everyone up to the same level. You don't need to worry about trying to implement the same activities with every business unit. With the separate assessments, it would allow you to focus on each one and what would help them best.
Good. Thank you very much. We have other question.
No. The person delete the question, but there are a lot of messages saying thanks, excellent, thank you very much, great presentation, excellent webinar. There are a lot of positive messages.
Okay. I just saw the question that I do realize I never really said what Owasp was. So to try and say it in less than a few minutes. So Owasp is a project, and it's an open project. So it's members from the community serving as volunteers to contribute to this open, widely available body of knowledge and collection of tools. And they're all focused on the security of web applications. So it's managed by a foundation in the US, the Owasp Foundation. There are chapters throughout the world. And really, it's one of those things where when you get involved with Owasp, you bring in whatever your expertise is, and there are things that you're trying to get out of it. So you would request, so it might be that what you're interested in is a security testing tool. So you would look through the Owasp projects to see what tools are being worked on. You see one that looks like it would be useful to you, you start using it, you find issues, you go to their GitHub project and submit the issues. If you are ambitious as a developer and you want to get in there with helping to try to fix them, then you can clone the project, make the fixes, submit a pull request. So essentially, Owasp is one giant open source project, but it's looking at hundreds of different little pieces around application security. A few of the key things that are really good to look at: there's the application security verification standard. There's the mobile security testing guide. There's the Owasp Z attack proxy, which is a great dynamic testing tool. There's Juice Shop and Security Shepherd, which are really great intentionally vulnerable web applications that you can use to learn about application weaknesses, and so on and so on. And Samm is one of the flagship projects of Owasp.
Yeah, thank you very much about it. This what it means, Owasp. It really was really nice presentation, and I think that we have to say hello to our sponsor also, and we have Hakada. What is Hakada, Natalia?
Hakada is a community about women. The members are all women, and we share information, a lot of things. But it's a community only for women. They like cybersecurity.
Okay, nice, really nice. Thank you very much. And we have another Backtrack Academy. We say hello also. And this is our sponsor from the beginning. And finally, I think that we have one community meeting before this. Do you remember which one is?
Yes. We remember 7 November is Beside Chile.
Beside Chile, everyone is invited to Beside Chile. Obviously, you also, John DeLeo, to participate to see our Beside Chile. I know that your Spanish maybe it's not the best one, but maybe you will try to stay with us.
All right, thank you.
No, thank you very much. Goodbye.
All right, thank you all.
Bye-bye. Bye, Natalia.
Bye, thanks.